Welcome to this first webinar of the year for Page Executive. Very happy to see you. I don't see you, but you see me. But very happy to most probably see a lot of frequent flyer that join us today. And for the ones that comes for the first time, very welcome. Please let me introduce you, Stefan Homeister, who kindly accepted to join this one session, a session that is a session of multiple sessions that will go along this year, because we wanted to treat as, let's say, a recurring topic, courageous leadership as an important topic that Stefan will be opening. I'm not introducing Stefan because Stefan will introduce himself, career, philosophy, and obviously the approach. Stefan is a leadership coach that you will most probably enjoy and especially learn a lot about the components of courage in leadership and how to achieve it. For the ones not knowing us, Page Executive is the exec search arm of Page Group. We are present for now 20 plus years and represent 185 consultants spread in 22 of the 35 countries where we operate, actually present in the 5 continents. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Christophe José and Jonathan Wise, who are respectively heading Europe and the UK, our major 2 regions, who allow obviously these webinars, as well as Saras Gil, who is our head of marketing. Last but not least, Denis Hofmeister, who kindly introduced Stefan. Denis, who is operating from Germany. I'm based myself in Switzerland today. We'll spend an hour together. I'll head it to Stefan, and we'll have hopefully plenty of time, most probably 20-25 minutes for your question. Before wrapping up the last 5 minutes. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Raphael, for your warm introduction and for the opportunity to participate and contribute here with Page Executive today. Thank you also for choosing this wonderful topic, which in fact is at the heart of leadership today and hopefully at the heart of some of the questions that the people on the call, it's now though more than 100, are dealing with every single day. So let me share the screen and we get going. I hope you can all see this screen now. Great. Thank you, Raphael. Rock and roll. Page Executive Webinar, Courageous Leadership. Let me briefly introduce myself so you understand the context against which I'm talking. Privately, I'm married. I have 2 wonderful children. I'm all about family, sports, and speed. And here is my professional CV. So I've run 3 different careers. My first career was with a global consumer goods company with an American heart. And I assume some of you know Procter Gamble. I used to work for P&G for 18 years, half of the time in local operational roles, half of the time in European, more strategic roles. My last assignment was a general management role for 3 countries and 2 business units. Here I learned leadership, and I learned different leadership in the second phase of my career, which was the first assignment was the chief marketing officer role at T-Mobile in Germany, where I was suddenly in a much faster environment. I told you I like speed. I somehow humorously renamed fast-moving into slow-moving consumer goods, comparing the speeds. I was part of a 6-people team leading an 8 billion business, very big, with 7,500 people to lead. And I had the sheer luck, I didn't do anything to deserve it, to be the one who was responsible for launching the very first iPhone into the world, working for 1 year with Steve Jobs and his Apple team in Cupertino. A great learning at T-Mobile. And then I joined my third company, third employer. I was invited to join the consumer goods business again, and I was invited to be one of the 6 board leaders leading SAB Miller Europe. Maybe some of you have heard about the company name. It used to be the 2nd biggest beer brewing business in the world with 80,000 people. We had about 5 billion in Europe and 12,000 people to lead all over Europe. So I learned leadership as a practitioner. I'm a leadership practitioner and catalyst with passion for your success. I've made mistakes, I've done some things right, and I'd like to share with you today the core of what I learned. And then my third career here on the right-hand side, that's what I'm doing right now. So in fact, I've been a supervisory member of a purely online-based startup that has since started selling in 4 different continents with 60 people, so doing well. This is symbolizing my own company, Stefan Homeister Leadership. I detected across my life that only when I lead myself well, and then I lead my boss well, when I lead my peers and team well, and when I feel well led, then and only then can I have success and fun in life. And that's why I devote my business life to leadership. And the second thing is, a few months ago, I founded the first dual generation consultancy with 8 stunning partners to offer broader consulting services. So this is the experience I draw from. In my role as a consultant, coach, and trainer, I've worked with 80 different companies and more than 5,000 leaders, at least one day live over the last 10 years. Here is my team. We are 8 people right now, 5 women, 3 men from 4 different countries. We are onboarding the next 2 team members as of next Monday. Here is our vision and purpose. Why do we exist? What do we want to achieve? Reality right now is that leadership still is the single biggest reason why top talent leaves a business. And therefore, my view, my vision is a world where every employee leads well and feels well led. Why? Because the world would be a better place. Companies would grow faster. People would be more happy. That's why this is my vision. And what's our purpose? Why are we here? We are here to help companies be long-term meaningful by clear strategy, sustained change, and leading with more impact. Let's zoom into your world. Let's zoom into your context. Let me pick out 2 things that I detected over the last years that matter. The first one is called decision density. It's a publication in Handelsblatt from April 2016. Already at that time, when we were still talking about the VUCA world, there was one substantial change for your business life. Over the 2 decades prior, the decision density had gone up 4x, meaning that you, Raphael, today are taking 4 times as many decisions as the same Raphael in the same role 20 years ago. So that's a substantial change. You're taking 4 times as many decisions every week, every day, every hour. So that to me symbolizes how the world got much, much faster. And the second context I'd like to put this into is the COVID context. What happened over the last 12 months? In my view, many of the changes that were going on anyway were accelerated exponentially. The good and the bad change. Bad change, for instance, is poverty in Latin America. People living with €1 or less per day. The number of poor in Latin America before COVID was 20 million. The number of poor in Latin America this morning is 210 million. So that's the bad side of change. And there is a great side of change. For instance, the pace of growth of e-commerce has gone up tenfold in COVID. That means the number of people who for the first time ever purchased online has grown 10 times faster during COVID than in the 10 years prior. So change has bad and good sides. And I think that's the world that many of us find ourselves in right now. Now let's talk about leadership. Why? Why does leadership matter at all? Well, it matters for your business. Here, evidence that strong leaders double transformation success. And I assume that many of you are working in companies where you're currently transforming parts of your business or your entire corporation. And this is a great fact from McKinsey, from a senior partner in Zurich, from Claudio Faeser, shared in a podcast. The podcast is called Leadership at Scale. And one of the things they cite here is comparing transformation agendas of companies. So here on the left-hand side, you see a few hundred companies that run a typical transformation. So there is geographic expansion. There is acceleration of global supply chains. There is productivity things, the classical business agenda. What they do not have on the left-hand side is they do not change their leadership. These companies have a transformation success of 1. Now let's look at the right-hand side. Another few hundred companies with very similar transformation agendas as on the left. However, with one difference. They have leadership transformation as one explicit part of their transformation agenda. And that one change, that one difference, increases transformation success by a factor of 2.4. So if you want to transform successfully, you also should transform the way you lead. Second reason why leadership matters. It doubles profit growth. This is a stunning fact from a study published by Zenger Volkmann in 2010. The so far biggest study I could get my hands on, showing a correlation between leadership behavior as perceived by people led and profitability of the business unit that these women and men are leading. So based on 300,000 360 feedbacks for 30,000 leaders in hundreds of companies all over the world, and then correlated to 4 to 5 years development of the profits of their business units. And what you can see is those people who are perceived as poor leaders by the people around them, they on average reduce the profitability of their business unit by $1.2 million a year. Those many good ones, those 80% in the good middle who are doing a good job, they have grown the profits of their business units by 2.4 million a year, while those 10% best leaders on the very right-hand side, who are perceived as the most impactful leaders, they have increased the profits of the business units they run by an average of $4.5 million over a course of 5 years. So strong leaders double profit growth. Now, I'd like to now share with you my thesis on courageous leadership. I'd like to start with it, and I'll come back to this at the very end. So what do I suggest we as leaders, you as leaders, should think about? Number one, the most important person you lead is yourself. And this is not egoistic, but I think it's important and profound. And in leading yourself, I invite you, build your courage muscle, because courage is a muscle that can be trained. Second, in leading other individuals, one-on-one, no matter whether it's a peer, a direct report, a partner, a customer, leading individually, help people grow their courage by expecting and encouraging, expecting and encouraging. The best boss I've ever had for 3 years did this with me. He promoted me twice into roles that were bigger than me, and all he did was to expect that I succeed and then encourage me to succeed. Yeah? So in leading other individuals, expect and encourage. 3, in leading teams, build your team. It has probably never been more important to have a real team than right now. And a team is not people working together, particularly not when in siloed groups. A team is people trusting each other, consistently putting the company goal, the team goal above their individual goal, and taking themselves and others into accountability for really demanding goals. So courageous leadership on teams, build your team and build your team's courage. And number 4, in leading systemically, many of you will lead big organizations. Some of you will lead entire companies. You shouldn't spend your time working in the system operating. Your main role, I think, is working on the system, is building the system. And my advice would be, build your systems such that doing what's right doesn't even require courage. It is expected to do right. It is also expected that you make mistakes, because we are humans. We all want to do right, but we will make mistakes. So one further advice is build an error and learning culture. Because in my experience, my observation across 80 different companies now, one of the reasons why people hesitate is they fear failure. So help them remove that fear, build a culture where people know we want to win and we will mistakes along the way, and that's perfectly fine. So build systems where doing what's right is expected, where doing what's right doesn't even require courage, and where you build error and learning cultures so people know they are allowed to make mistakes. Now let's zoom in. What is leadership at all? A lot of things have been said about leadership. There is endless numbers of publications, videos, you name it. And it's fun. I find it inspiring. But I'd like to boil it down to my personal view. Probably your view is slightly different, but here is mine. The essence of good leadership to me is leaders achieve extraordinary results, because that's the point. Leadership is not an art for itself. Leaders achieve extraordinary results, but not by doing the work themselves, by helping others do what's right. That's my philosophy. That's my belief what leadership is in the first place. And let's take it apart on the key contributors, the key components of leadership. In my experience, your people expect from you 3 overarching themes. They want orientation, they want motivation, and they want connection. Yeah? They want to understand what's the purpose of this business, what's the vision, why are we here, what's the goal, what's the strategy, what's the priority, right? So that's orientation. Second, I think your people want motivation. And yes, there are ways how you can actively motivate people. And 3, probably more now than ever, when most of us are used to working remote, they want the feeling of connectedness. They want to feel that you're connected with them, even if you're not present all the time. But whatever we can do to make our people feel connected with each other, with you as leaders, and with the right resources, that's what people want from leadership. Now let's take it a level lower. Let's take it to leadership competencies. Here are the 8 factors that allow me to explain what good leadership is all about and also to assess leadership. Factor number 1, clarity. People want clarity, although they are ready to deal with ambiguity. They know that tomorrow can change. But today I'd like to understand, what does success looks like? And if Raphael, if you're my boss, I would like to understand what you expect from me. What do you really expect from me? And one of the biggest mistakes I've made as a leader, as a young leader, was very naive to assume that it's clear what you expect from me, Raphael, because there is a job description. Now, in hindsight, I can laugh about myself. This is naive, right? To really align expectations between a boss and a subordinate is one of the things that you can do to lead successfully. So create clarity. The second thing that I find important in leadership is focus. It's very easy to say yes to things that in isolation look intriguing. Yeah? It is easy to say yes to many things, but the hard part is to say yes to the right things that matter the most and to say no to the things that don't matter enough. And the best leaders I've ever worked with, and the man from whom I'm still learning, although he passed away 11 years ago, Steve Jobs, he was the man who just exercised focus with us and with me to an extent that I had never seen with anybody else. So great leadership is also about focus, clearly saying yes to the 3 things that matter the most, but also no to things that don't matter enough. Next point, energy. I think it is very important to actively deal with energy on an individual level, to make sure that we are in a positive mood, that we can be energy positive to people around us, to also take a break when our body needs a re-energization, also to intervene when we see there is a team conflict, there is energy going against each other. If I'm a bad leader, I just see it, I ignore it, and I go away. I just let the energy sink. That's poor leadership in my view. If I see a conflict, I need to intervene, and I need to help these people understand and realign, to realign the energy going forward. That's what great leaders do. And again, to the one man who was my boss for the longest time, in an incredible way. Whenever I left his office after a one-on-one, I had more energy than I had when going in. So he was always energy positive with me. Next factor. That's a factor that I added just a few years ago. I think 20 years ago, you could be a successful leader without being curious. But nowadays, since the world is changing so incredibly fast, we ought to be curious consistently. Let's not mix this with strategy change. If we have a strategy that works, that's by God, let's stick with it. Let's execute it. But we should always remain curious to understand the changes around us, to learn from them, and to see how we can optimize at least our execution. So I think curiosity and a learner's mindset are important leadership competencies. Number 5, and if I had to pick one of those 8, this would be my pick. Trust. I think the biggest currency that all of you have as a leader is the trust you earned with others. Trust cannot be commanded. Trust shouldn't be expected. Trust can only be earned. And in my life, trust is earned in a very simple way. When I see someone the first time around, trust is a feeling. It's a gut feeling. My feeling is that woman says what she really thinks. She says what she thinks. And the second time around, I meet a person, that feeling is accompanied by an observation, because I now see that she does what she said last time. Yeah? And the more often people do what they say, the more I trust them. That's the way how trust is built in my life. Yeah? And trust is the most important ingredient of any human relationship, and therefore also for leadership. Number 6, respect. And it's not sympathy. You won't find liking or sympathy on this chart. And I'd like to add, yes, I'm human. Yes, I have a deeply seated need to feel loved. But here we are not talking about families. We are talking about business. We are talking about leadership. And in this context, it's about respect. In order to do what's right, oftentimes you can combine respect and sympathy. Oftentimes people like what's right, but sometimes they don't like what's right. Sometimes what's right is very uncomfortable and very inconvenient. And then you have to make a choice. Do you want to be liked all the time, or do you want to be respected all the time? And I'm convinced a leader needs to have respect all the time. Number 7, and that's the reason why I spent 18 years in my first business, responsibility. I think it's important to take responsibility and to then deliver, and to also give responsibility and then leave people with their responsibility rather than intervening too fast. Yeah? I spent 18 years in a business where I felt every single month I was getting more responsibility. And believe me, I made mistakes, including some big ones, but I never felt punished. I never felt excluded for my mistakes. I felt invited to learn from them. And I just took more and more responsibility. So that's, to me, leadership competence number 7. And number 8, very important, is consequence, consistency. Yeah? Leadership is not just about thinking what's right or saying what's right. The most important thing is to do what's right. Consistency and consequence, particularly when the odds are high, the stakes are high, the choices are hard to make. But that's the point. Leadership is not about pleasing. It's about doing what's right. So these are my 8 leadership competencies, all supporting orientation, motivation, and connection as the big themes that I think most of your people expect from leaders today. Now, what's the scarcest resource you're dealing with? In my view, there is a subtle rebalancing going on over the last 3 decades. And don't get me wrong, money matters. Without money, businesses won't work. So making money is a legitimate and still important goal and objective. And money still is a scarce resource. But in my observation, there is a subtle shift going on. Nowadays, I feel time has become the scarcer resource than money many times. And therefore, we should treat time with the same care and awareness that we used to treat money. I've been in probably 150 budget meetings in my career. Yeah? In every single budget meeting, we talked about money, but not in every meeting we talked about time. And I think it's about time to change this. The scarcest resource we have, more and more often, is time. Now, context around modern leadership. There are two different models of leadership. Here is the old one, the old-fashioned, the traditional model, where organizations are seen as machines, where leadership is defined horizontally. Yeah? So you have the frontline employees at the bottom, you have middle management in the middle, and you have leadership at the top. In this old-fashioned model, the expectation was that all decisions are taken at the top. All decisions should be taken 99% correctly before we execute. And then they come back down in form of approvals or releases or marching orders to the people who execute the decisions. That's the old-fashioned model. In my view, this model is outdated. I just know one business here in Switzerland, one business that still shows some tangible traits of this and is doing well, but that is a monopoly. There is no competitor. I think today, most companies are on their way towards the right-hand side, to this other model, where organizations are perceived and understood as living organisms, as networks of empowered teams that work together to achieve a common North Star, but can be quickly redeployed. Leadership here is playing the role of an enabler rather than a decision maker, an enabler that helps teams achieve their own missions. And if we look at the 4 key changes from left to right, they are quite substantial. Yeah? If I'm a man, I just reside from a Swiss bank who I had a leadership seminar with last week, a wonderful man who said, Stefan, you know, one of the things I'd like to get out of the seminar with you is I've been 37 years in this old thinking, and I want to get into the new one. I want to cut off meine alten Zöpfe, my old behaviors, my old habits. Help me get across. It's not easy, but I think this is the model, how leadership is supposed to run today. And there are 4 fundamental changes. I think the changes are in attitude, decision-making, communication, and accountability, one by one. In the old model, the leaders were kings and either expected to be treated like kings or were treated like kings. Nowadays, leaders are much more servants. Leadership is a general attitude for everyone and not a privilege of a few chosen people at the top. So the first thing that changes is the attitude to leadership, from kings to servants, and leadership now being a general attitude. The second thing I see changing is decision-making. Previously, every decision at the top, 99% quality decision before we start executing, and that is moving to helping others make decisions, to help teams make decisions, to help the frontline people make decisions, those people who have the best information and are closest to the action. Yeah? And today, it is better to be fast than perfect. Today, the best companies I serve and work with are deciding quickly, not only well, they decide well, but they start executing when the decision is about 80 to 90% right. Then they start executing and they optimize the rest along the way, rather than waiting until 99% quality of a decision is reached. Why? Because it costs a hell of a lot of time. Oftentimes, the market is long made when you wait to execute until you're almost perfectly sure. I just make 2 exceptions. M&A, if I buy a company or if I sell a company, I better make sure that I'm making the right decision, that the capability I buy, the capability I want to buy is really in the company I'm buying. Then the second area to me is recruitment decisions. Because in my experience, doubts in people over time have grown rather than declined. If at an interview stage I have a severe doubt, I should not hire the person. In doubt, say no. There I should be 99% sure. But in many other decisions, I think now it's about being fast, better than perfect. The third fundamental shift in leadership is all around communication. And I think communication and leadership anyway are very strongly intertwined. In the old world, leaders were expected to talk, and they were used to talking top down. Nowadays, it's much more important to lead with your ears by listening well, and not just pretending to listen, but by really listening to profound, precise, relevant questions and to what your people have to tell you about them. So it's from talking top down to listening, to leading with your ears. And again, the relationship you have is not among superior to inferior. It's a conversation among equals, conversing among equals, even for an intern having a conversation with the CEO. And the fourth fundamental element I see changing in leadership is accountability. In the old world, top leadership was accountable for everything because they decided everything. Nowadays, accountability should be with everyone, starting with the youngest intern in the team. They should be given accountability to take decisions, to own results, and then they should be allowed to keep that accountability. So these to me are the four most profound changes in leadership: attitude, decision-making, communication, and accountability. Now let's come to courage. What is it? Why does it matter? Why has Page Executive made such a good choice to call this webinar Courageous Leadership? Because it matters big time, and I'll show you in a minute why. Now let's first talk about what courage actually is. Courage is not avoiding risk, but courage is taking calculated risk. And courage is not being fearless. The only people on this planet who scare the shit out of me are people who say, I'm not scared of anything. Sorry, we are humans. I am scared of some things. We should be scared of some things. But courage means that despite my fear, I do what's right. I do not allow my fear to prevent me from doing what's right. That to me is courage. And courage means taking accountability and acting. Now, what I'd like to share with you is an example of courage. The headline is called My Aircraft. And I admit it's a radical, it's an extreme situation. You'll see in a minute. It's an exceptional, radical situation. Normally, you and me, we have less stress and more time to take decisions that matter. Here in these 90 seconds, it is 155 lives on the line. What you will see in a minute is 90 seconds of communication between a pilot and 3 teams on the ground helping the pilot to save a plane and to land a plane safely. It happens in New York, and what you will see is that on his way up from LaGuardia Airport, one of the airports in New York, suddenly a plane hits birds. There is a bird strike. A bird strike for a pilot is not a big issue if it's 1 bird or 2 birds. But in this case, we are not hitting 1 or 2, we are hitting a few thousand birds. And we are not just losing thrust and energy in one engine, we are losing both engines. So that's a critical crisis situation. The pilot first takes control and says, my aircraft, because typically the co-pilot is flying us. My aircraft. And then what he does is, within 90 seconds, he connects quickly to his team, to his co-pilot, to people on the ground to get information. He gets facts. He does frequent quick orientation while spreading calm, mood, and cool head. Courage? Oh yes, he had to have courage. He had to assess and reassess options. He had to decide what's right and then act. And all of this in just 90 seconds. And if you see this video for the first time, just to explain a bit the audio, that's the communication that's going on. So they talk about birds. They talk about a return to LaGuardia Airport. and then there is the word unable. Then they assess a second airport called Teterboro and runway 1 in Teterboro. And after assessing the opportunity, he again says, unable, we are going to be in the Hudson. And courage is taking accountability for decisions and results, as you will see. So here is a map of New York's airports. What you see here is LaGuardia Airport. This is where the plane takes off in this direction. Round about here is where they have the bird strike. Here is a small private airport called Teterboro Airport that they are assessing as a place to land. And down here on the left-hand side, you have Newark, which is a little far down the road, but at least theoretically an option. Right in the middle, you see the Hudson River, where the journey is going to end. So let's listen to 90 seconds of communication between takeoff at LaGuardia and watering down in the Hudson River.
We don't have the sound.
Ah.
Captain.
So there is no sound, Raphael?
No.
I'm sorry to hear this, and I'll quickly explain what's happening. So in fact, there is constant communication between the pilot and LaGuardia Airport. At first, he thinks about returning, but they are too far away. Then they assess the option to go to Teterboro, the private one in New Jersey on the other side. They assess it, and he just says, unable, sorry, I can't. And then this is happening. And here they are out in the Hudson. They are opening the doors. And with about 2 minutes, they evacuate the whole plane. And by making good decisions, this pilot saves 155 lives, not even a broken leg. And to me, this is a good example, even though radical, a good example of courageous leadership, being connected, getting the information, assessing the information, remaining cool despite high blood pressure, and taking a courageous decision to land this plane in the Hudson River. Now, let's move to another example, less critical,
and
more common.
Just conscious of time, sorry, because I'm also the safeguard of time.
Let's skip it.
The captain succeeded in 90 seconds. If you can move to the second example, and then we can go to the questions, because there's a lot of very interesting questions that we'd like to cover.
Rock and roll. So here is the example, publishing house in Germany. You know them, more than 100 titles. Before COVID-19, they had 250 in-person client meetings to generate the orders per year. So they met clients face-to-face in the publishing house. March 10 last year, COVID hits, no more in-person meetings. And then it just took them 3 days to have a completely virtual client meeting infrastructure implemented in just 3 days. Courage by the leaders and courage by the CEO to let them do it. Result, absolutely magnificent. 6 months later, they don't have fewer meetings. They have 40% more meetings with clients with higher efficiency and fantastic results. And again, the key enabler for this was courage to radically change the whole go-to-market model from a face-to-face live to a completely virtual meeting infrastructure. Another good example of courage. Courage is a muscle. You can build it by doing what you're scared of. Yeah? That's the way to build courage. And in concluding, let me just recap what I suggest leaders should think about when it comes to courageous leadership. In leading yourself, build your courage muscle. In leading other individuals, expect and encourage, expect and encourage. In leading teams, build your teams. And in systems leadership, build your entire company. Build your systems such that doing what's right is expected doesn't require any courage, and build an error and learning culture. So this is what I wanted to share. I hope you enjoyed it. And now up to questions.
Fantastic. Many thanks for these great examples, and for the ones that I haven't seen, the movies with Tom Hanks, obviously quite fascinating. Many thanks. A lot of learning. I took a lot of notes, and I'm sure there's a lot of boiling questions that I need to represent. I'll ask the first one, if I may. My first one was about how to train these muscles, because but that's my incarnation of muscles for courage. But I'll leave it with that, because basically the answer is call Stefan tomorrow. The first question on my side before passing it on is, do you prepare organization and leaders for failure as well? Because failure comes quite often, but how to prepare for failure?
I think a good way to prepare an organization for failure is to make it public, and to make it a public choice, and to make it publicly acknowledged that we are humans, we make mistakes. When I look at my best year in my career, it was a year where I took 10 decisions. 2 of them were completely wrong. 8 of them were right, and the 2 most important ones were in the right bucket. Yeah, but I think the biggest risk we can take is not to take any risk at all. If I run a year and every single decision I take was right, then I have made the biggest mistake of all. I didn't take risk. I just did what I knew in the past. So I think that's being overt about this, admitting this. Admitting failure is one way to make organizations more comfortable with failing. I'll give you 2 quick examples. Peter Brabeck, at the time CEO of Nestlé, 20 years ago, shared with us at P&G a mistake. He was asked in front of hundreds of P&Gers, Peter, what was your biggest mistake in your career? And Raphael, I thought this is now a general answer. No, he didn't. He said, I made a 500 million euros mistake by recommending an acquisition, leading the due diligence team. I wanted to buy a capability to roll out in Nestlé. I even moved to Brazil for half a year to lead the company myself, to only then learn that the capability that I wanted to buy was not at all in the company, but in the supplier of the company. A 500 million euro mistake, publicly admitted in front of hundreds of people. That is one good example to admit as a senior leader that you're human and that you have made big mistakes yourself. Of course, you can complement this with an expectation. We don't want to make mistakes, of course, but we should make mistakes and we should learn from them so that we don't repeat them. I think that is a powerful way to make organizations feel at ease with failure and learning.
And transparency as well. I'm jumping on the questions. I'll try to go one by one. There's a lot. I'd love you to elaborate, but I think we'll have only concise answers from you. We'll see how you can sort out. First question came from Susanna. If I may introduce some of them, they've not been hiding their names. Heading Geneva Airport HR, she asked a very good questions for a public institution. How do you deal with change and courage when you cannot choose or change your team easily, neither eventually, let's say, lead by the performance, sadly. So how do you deal with these components in a public sector organization?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, which I realize this is probably an environment where change can maybe feel a little bit harder to accomplish. But let me give you 2 ideas. First, when I see people do what they do, rather than what I think makes sense, I first ask myself, and then I ask them, why do you do what you do? And I typically come across 3 patterns. The first pattern is blind spots. They aren't even aware that there is a better opportunity. The second is fear. They're just scared to change. And the third one is comfort. They may simply be too lazy, too comfortable to change. So first idea is find out why do they do what they do and not what makes more sense. And the second thing is finding the personal trigger. Every single one of us here in the call is motivated by things that are slightly different. Understanding what motivates the other person one-on-one. What is the biggest personal trigger of my teammate? And then linking the change work I need to the personal trigger has induced change also in publicly run organizations. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Second question, Jean-Alain Proust from Barclays in Paris, if I may also mention his name. Very good question. What behavior can we adopt if it appears that our manager aren't courageous leaders? You talked about the vice versa approach, how to lead your boss, but how can you elaborate on that?
Jean-Alain, wonderful question. One of the most challenging questions I find, because it is about leading your boss. And it's about leading your boss in a situation where you can observe that she or he ducks away, lacks courage, right? So again, my first suggestion is, rather than confronting him or confronting her in public, which I don't think is a good idea. I don't want to be confronted in public for something where I just may feel scared. I'm human as well. It's okay if leaders make mistakes. But one thing you can do is to find out in a one-on-one conversation why he does what he does and why he's ducking away, what he's scared of, what he is missing, and then engaging him in a conversation. I've just seen in one of my clients just last night how that can move mountains, right? Anonymously, I've been contacted by a CEO who told me that he will have to let go one of his senior leaders because the global owner of the business wants this. And I just asked a question. I just went back and said, why do you do this? Why do you allow this decision to be taken by someone above you and you reduce yourself to be the reporter of a problem rather than a leader taking accountability? I mean, it's your choice. It's a tough choice. I had about 3 situations in my career where I knew when I'm now going to do what's right, I'm risking my job. I risk to be fired, or I risk to be at least reduced in the ranks. I'm less liked. But Jean-Alain, every single time I decided to do what's right, I confronted the conversation. I once had an issue where my peer, a senior peer, was turning around someone, preventing my team member to go to a business trip. And I confronted this and said, I went to the global CEO and said, look, in my view, this behavior is completely unacceptable. If I were you, I would fire him. This is against our values. It didn't happen, but I was honest. I said what I think, and at least there were consequences. So this is a more radical example. Yeah? But I think the best suggestion is, if you see that your boss is not as courageous as you want him to be, have a conversation and ask why. Understand the barrier. White spot, is he not even aware? Fear, is there a way you can help him reduce the fear? Or comfort? Yeah. And in my example of having to fire a leader, that CEO went back to his global owner and regained the power to take the decision himself, which I think is great. If you feel you have to let go of a person because the person isn't growing fast enough, it is not the right fit, fine, then take the decision. But that decision should be yours and not your boss's. And he proudly came back to me this morning calling me, and I was glad. All I did was asking a question that ultimately made him rethink, and he pulled together his courage. Last night they had a 4-hour one-on-one, and it led to a radical change. So engaging in the right conversation, also with your boss, may be worth a try.
I'll stay on this positive note with a question that relates to our domain, which is more assessment and recruitment. I will combine 2 questions. There was a question from Maria, who wanted to understand what are the assessment tools to assess these 10% of fantastic, courageous leaders, one. And I will combine with a question from Ibrahim from Saudi Arabia, who very cleverly mentioned, okay, trust is earned, needs to be earned. How to assess then trust? Is it there a way to assess trust? So again, assessing leaders, assessing trust.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Ibrahim, for this wonderful question. I think in order to assess leaders, we should assess based on the view of those who are led. So a good way to assess leadership performance is to have a 360 degrees feedback, including your boss, your reports, your peers, and asking them to assess how well you lead. And doing that into well-chosen leadership competencies. I just shared my own model, my own 8 competencies. There are different ones. Choose one that you think is right to measure leadership in your context and for your future, and then get data, observations to assess, including a self-assessment. And then allow your leaders to honestly see this, to brutally honest see how others perceive their leadership. Yeah? One of the biggest mistakes I see seniors do, they are scared to be honest. I can only recommend be brutally honest in your self-assessment as a leader. You will do things well. That's why you are executives. That's why you're on this call. And you will make mistakes. Why? Because you're human. We all make mistakes. So take a 360, take a good leadership competency model, and then have 10 people assess how they perceive your leadership, and then look into your mirror. Honestly look at what you see, and then strengthen your strengths, because you win with your strengths, and neutralize your weakness. Don't spend time on turning weaknesses into strengths, because then you lose your real strengths. Yeah? Neutralize your weakness and then focus on your strengths. That is how I would suggest measuring and assessing leaders. That's how we assess leaders in our company. And then the second question, Ibrahim, on trust. How to measure trust was the question, right? Yeah. So I think there is a quantitative and a qualitative way. The quantitative way is you can include trust into your leadership assessment, which is what I'm doing. I right now coach 8 senior leaders, 4 women, 4 men, individually. And we always start with a leadership assessment. One of the questions, one of the factors, in fact, is trust. And then we have 3 questions below to ask. Specifically ask, how well, how much do you trust your leader? It's a 4-scale system, and anything that is worse than a 1 in the top rating is, to me, worth talking, right? So you can measure it quantitatively. And then there is a qualitative way. I think trust is also something qualitative. It's what people say about me once I'm out of the room. So if you wanted to know how Raphael trusts me, you could ask Raphael once I'm out of the room. Ask him. Ask for an assessment. Yeah. You can also see in the behavior, do people dare to have a courageous conversation with that person, or do they shy away because they are afraid that they get submerged because of an authoritarian behavior? You can see trust, whether people dare to have an eye-level conversation and to speak the truth. Yeah? Psychological safety is the biggest driver of team success in Google. It's the feeling of always being allowed to say what I really think and to be who I really am, even if I'm the only one in the room. And you can feel this when you're in the room.
Conscious of time, and for once, I prefer to have a bit of a conclusion on our side, but as well as on your side. Many thanks. I think what I learned, and I'm sure people share today, is courageous leadership seems to be something accessible, something that we can train, and that's reassuring for the ones that do not feel always courageous enough. It's something that is participative as well as the new mode of management, as you were saying. But one question is still boiling for me is, top-down completely obsolete. There's some situation where, and again, the captain showed it, he had to obviously look at the options, but take the decision by himself at some stage. Time was obviously a limitation once again, but is top-down completely obsolete?
Thank you for your question, Raphael. I think it's not. I think there are still a few situations where top-down leadership and top-down decision-making may be right, specifically in crisis situation. Yeah? When the house is burning, then I do not want to get a question to try and figure out myself. I want to be told where the fire extinguisher is, and I want to be told where the emergency exit is. So true crisis moments, to me, still justify top-down leadership. However, in true crisis moments, typically we are not at our peak performance. We are just running for our lives. And I don't think that running for our lives is a good mode to achieve long-term top performance. It creates people who obey. It creates people who run because they shall run. They are told to run. And I don't believe in people who obey. I believe in people who are just motivated by desire rather than by duty. So in my view, the vast majority of situations, we are better advised to lead people by good questions, by empowering them. And in most situations, these participative leadership, this leadership on eye level, will give much better results in less time. But I agree, there are a few selective moments, specifically true crisis moments, where top-down leadership may still be the right thing to do.
Excellent. Many, many thanks. Many thanks to all participants. I've been looking at the numbers. We reach above 140 and still 126 as we speak, actively listening, and most probably will continue. If you'd like to continue with Stefan, you could definitely go on the Light Wolf Leadership podcast that are broadcasted on your website, or the ones upcoming. If you'd like to continue with us as well in the next webinar on courageous leadership, who's taking over, please pencil down 17th of June. 17th of June, we have the luxury of having Ellen Bradley. Ellen Bradley was the EVP HR of Bureau Veritas, very well known, who has the difficult task to also accompany change and transformation within the institution globally, and she'll incarnate again another angle of courage. Many, many thanks, Stefan, for the generous tips and highlights around courageous leadership and for opening this fantastic session. Any last word on your side?
A pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you also for this great choice on courageous leadership. It matters more than ever, and it's a learnable skill. It's not a God-given gift. It's a learnable skill. I'm glad you chose the topic, and I'm glad I could be your guest. Thank you very much, Raphael and team.
Ciao. Thank you.